When I'm talking, if something comes to mind that you just want to ask a question, ask. That gives us, it's a lot easier to just kind of talk back and forth than it is for me to just sit up here and lecture over, what's happened and what's went on. I came here in 1973, was my first season here, the fall of 1973. I started coaching in 1969 out at Cedar Valley of Summers, 14 miles west of Fort Dodge. And my old high school basketball coach was the superintendent. And I was student teaching in Maquoketa Valley. And he was the elementary principal there. And he come over and they made me go out and student teach at Maquoketa Valley. And they made my brother go out there and student teach at Maquoketa Valley because our dad was the high school principal. And they said they didn't have to worry about going out and supervising us because they knew with our dad that we were, and yeah, we had to go to school at 6 o'clock every morning so he could review our lesson plans for the day. And if they weren't right, we had to redo them. And so the student teachers did love to send us out there, so we'd go out there and he said, then you can just live at home. But we were at home and Dean Weaver came over, knocked on the door, and I turned and said, Dad, Dean's here to see you. And he says, no, I came over here to talk to you. He says, I just got a superintendent's job out in western Iowa, and I want you to be my football coach. And he says, one problem, they've never played football, you'll be starting the program. And I already had a contract for Sioux City East to be an assistant there and teach at Sioux City East. And my brother and my dad told me if I wanted to be a head coach, I should do it, because if I went to a big school as an assistant, I'd probably be buried as an assistant for my whole career. And so I decided I'd go out there. 2 years into it, he called me into his office at the end of the year and said, well, next year, you're going to be the head basketball coach. And the head basketball coach is going to be your assistant. And he says, and the principal is going to be the football coach and you're going to be his assistant. And he told me that I was always a better basketball player than I was a football player, and I was a better basketball coach than I was a football coach, and that I'd never cut it as a football coach. So Kathy and I moved to Nesco, Missouri the next year. We were there 2 years, and then my dad had a massive heart attack. He was a high school principal up at Maquoketa Valley. My mom was an elementary teacher up there. And my brother was coaching out at the University of South Dakota at that time. And we decided I was the one that should try to get closer. And I sent an application in, and John Schwabert hired me. And didn't know at that time, but John Schwabert knew all about me. He coached basketball at Marengo when I was playing basketball in North English. And he never said a word until after I'd signed the contract that he'd known me. And I did not know that Center Point was in the same conference with Maquoketa Valley, and he knew Dad. Had no idea. And so anyway, that's how I ended up coming here in 1973. And that first year I was here, I started out with a real bang. We lost the first 2 ball games. But they were close ball games. Then we won the last 7 ball games in a row. Then we found out the 2 teams that beat us both went undefeated. One's quarterback started at the University of Iowa later. One's running back started at the University of Iowa later. We played 2 real good teams close. We didn't realize how good we were. Had 2 good friends across the street that really made us feel welcome at home. One's here. If it wasn't for you, I especially Kathy, how many times she said, Jeanette, she doesn't know what she would have done if it hadn't been for you.
And where were you living then?
We were living in that house right behind the Casey store.
Yeah, we lived right there on the corner, 121 Water Street.
Right across the street. They were living right across the street. And Kathy went to the games with you guys because she didn't know where everything was. And then there was a man that took me under his wing, and we became the best of friends. And I spent hours and hours and hours with him, Bob Bowers. And Bob and I were like that. What scary was is we thought a lot alike, and that was awful scary for both of us. And, but we, you know, people always ask over the years, why did you stay? Why'd you stay? You surely had opportunities. And yeah, there were opportunities, especially in the 80s. There were some real good opportunities, but I've always been a small town boy. I was a small town college kid. I never liked the big school. I had kids in the elementary, upper middle school at that time when those jobs were being offered to me, and I just didn't want to move them into a big school. One job that was offered to me down in Tempe, Arizona, had 2,800 kids in a class, in one class. And I would have went down there. At that time, I was making about $14,000 here. That was with everything added on, my driver's ed and my teaching and my coaching and my bus driving and everything. I made about $14,000. My starting salary down there was going to be $54,000. And it was, I didn't teach. All I did was coach football. It was high school.
Wow.
That was another thing that turned me off.
Mm-hmm.
It really turned me off because people see me as the football coach. They don't realize that my mother was a music major. So when we were in high school, I was in vocal music, I was in instrumental music, my brother was too. My brother was the best long jumper in the state of Iowa for 3 years. Never went to the Drake Relays. You know why? High school principal wouldn't let him go because it was music contest at that time. So he never participated. We had the best two relays in the state of Iowa when I was a junior and senior, and never went to Drake Relays. Principal wouldn't let us go. Damn it. That was our father. But those was kind of the upbringing that I came up with, and it was very important with me. And what people didn't realize when I was here was that those kids being involved in other activities, being in plays, being in music, being out for other sports and that was very important to me. And when I'd go speak at clinics, people would ask me, what about your off-season program? And I'd say, I don't have one. And they said, well, what do you mean you don't have one? I said, once football's over, there's other activities going on. And I never did. And another thing that I did that I spoke on for years and that, clear back in the early 70s, football teams would start in the spring and they'd have 2 practices and 3 practices a day and the heat and that. After about a few years of that, I said, you know, I hated him as a player. I hate him as a coach. I don't think they do any good, so I did away with them and we practiced at 5 o'clock in the afternoon so the kids could keep their jobs before school started for 1 practice a day from 5 to about 6:30. And that was it. That's all we ever did. And everybody said, well, we couldn't get everything done in that amount of time. And I always told them, I said, then you're trying to do too much. And so just things that, and that was ingrained by my parents. And thank goodness I was in local music and that, and in plays. Never would have met my wife. Nellie, we had the lead in South Pacific together. I had the male lead, she had the female lead. And that's how we started going together in high school. Plus we sang a duet together. So, yeah, so it goes back, those beliefs go back a long ways. But when we came here in '73, thank goodness for good people that made us feel at home. And then that first football team, they set the tone for all that came after them. They bought what I had to sell, and they bought into it. And we ended up with that 7-2 record. And my assistants, I had 2 assistants, Bob Dillon and Dick Whitehead were my 2 assistants. And Dick was the swing assistant. He'd help Bob in the sophomore game, and then he'd come up and help me in the varsity game. And but we handled it, the 3 of us. And but some of those kids, you'd be interested to know, that first football team, the kids that got everything started. Robin Burrow, these were the seniors now. Bob Seek, Don Elgin, Terry Nielsen, Tim Jones, Craig James, Mike Corum, Larry Nielsen, Mark Haynes, Mark Moran, and Cecil Christensen. Those were the seniors on that first team that I coached here. They're all in their early to mid-50s now.
I graduated.
And I'm only in my mid-50s, but I saw
I graduated in '73, so I.
73. So you had just graduated.
Yep.
We escaped just in time.
You'd escaped just in time. How many years did you get held back? We give each other a rough time all the time, don't we? But the juniors in that group that were on that team were Ron Simon, Ron Ashlock, and Ron Ashlock. Story on Ron Ashlock. Every year he wouldn't show up for practice. And I knew where he was. He was out the golf course. So I'd go out to the golf course for lunch. And then I'd sit out there until he'd walk up, and then I'd walk out the door and I'd say, well, hi, Ron, how you doing? I said, missed you today at practice. Oh, yeah, I said, so, see you tomorrow? Yeah, he always showed up the second day. But Ron always had to have that special invitation. And, Mark Baugh, Arlen Seek, Mike Henderson, Philip Lala, Mike Lala, Rick Dunkel, Tim Clyde, and Lyle Kaut. Those were the juniors and seniors on that first team. And to say the least, those guys are, to me, are very, very special to this day because they bought into it, they got it started. And if it hadn't been for them, who knows what would have happened?
Right.
You know, who knows? And having two outstanding assistants too. You know, and so you know, it all started back then, and then in 1975 we had an outstanding team. It ended up going only 7-2, but that was a classic example of how kids you can have outstanding teams, but you have to be lucky. You can't have injuries. We lost, by the fourth game, we lost our quarterback, our best running back, our best guard, our best tackle with sprained ankles and things like that they couldn't play on, and we ended up losing 2 games. But that might have been one of the best teams I ever coached, but we weren't lucky. You gotta be lucky too, and you can't prevent all of those things. Some of those kids, Mike Atwood, Gene Fisher, Randy Stark, Dan Horrock, Steve Mervicka, Roger Thomas, Terry Morgan, David Huff, Doug Arnold, Mike Dunn, Keith Cadlick, Tom Mackey, Mike Meyer, John Luke, Don Simon, Brett Addy. Those were the seniors on that team that year. So it's kind of interesting to go back and see who some of those kids are. And if you wonder what I'm reading off of, this is, I have for every group that ever played for me, I have what they ran a 40 in when they were freshmen, what they bench pressed as a freshman, their sophomore year, their junior year, their senior year, for every group that ever played for them. And I always kept those. And yeah.
How long had the football been here?
I started, I think, 64 or 65.
Okay.
I'm not sure which year it was.
Okay.
It was one of those two.
I don't know how long.
Yeah, they'd only had it about 8 years
Okay.
when I came here, which I didn't realize at the time. All I remembered is that first year we went 7-2, and they said that was the best record they'd ever had.
Mr. Butler was the coach.
Yes. And I knew Mo real well. He'd come back to Bob's house, and then Bob would have me come over. And that was another story. Met Mo before I ever coached the first game here. If you remember Mr. Butler, Mr. Butler was a little rough around the edges, a little bit, I might say. But, is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah.
A little rough around the edges. And we're sitting down, and Mr. Bauer's that, and he asked me what I was going to run in that, and he says, "That won't work. You'll get your butt kicked."
Sounds like Mr. Butler.
Yeah, that's what I told him. And I wasn't so sure he wasn't right. I didn't know. But then, back in the late 70s, we started that series of football games with the Starman. And Dave Barclay was the coach up there. He was the quarterback on my college team when he was a freshman and I was a senior. We became good friends when we started coaching against each other. And some strange things happened in that rivalry. One of them was, we had a game down here, and all of a sudden the game I saw Coach Barkley walking across the field right in the middle of the play. I knew something was wrong. So I headed right across the field too. The officials are looking at us, not knowing whether or not to throw the flag or what. But I knew something was seriously wrong. And the officials knew both of us well enough that they didn't throw the flag in that. And they came right over to see what was wrong. They had had a car accident on the way down here, and they'd had 2 people killed that were parents of 2 of the kids that were playing in the game. And so we suspended the game while they could decide what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to go ahead and play the game or if they wanted to, and that. And I always remember that when that game was over with, and we were walking from the football field up to the high school, that you couldn't tell who were the Starmount players and who were the Center Point players. And from that time on, those teams, my brother, who played college football at Iowa and who coached college football and that, used to love to come up and watch that game. He said it was one of the hardest hitting games he'd ever seen, but he said it was so clean. The kids were helping each other up. They showed respect for each other. And when the game was over with, they'd be walking off the field and that. That's when I found out how much influence coaches and how the coaches interact with each other can influence the players. Because the kids fed off of Dave and I. And they used to wait to see what was going to happen before the game too, because then we got to play jokes on each other. His kids were down here visiting one time. One of his kids left his Starmount hat. I wore that Starmount hat the whole week of practice. So when the game, they're warming up for the game, I'm out there and walk over to talk to Dave in the center of the field while the players are that, and I got that Starmount hat. And finally he looks up and he says, "That's where Matt's hat's been." And so we were always pulling tricks on each other. Last game we ever played against each other, and Dave knew I was going to retire. That was after the '93 season, and we were playing up there for the district championship for a playoff spot. The whole works was on the line, and they brought the game ball over to me. And the host team, the home team, is to provide the football. Well, they brought a football over to me, and it was a football that had been used quite a bit. So anyway, Dave was about this far from us. And I turned to the officials, and the officials got to the point where they always wanted to see what we were going to do too. I mean, they knew we were going to do something. They just didn't know what we were going to do. And I said, "My gosh, this is the last game we're ever going to play against each other, and he uses a practice football." I said, "Tell him to at least go in and get a new football for our last game that we ever play against each other." So they walk over, and I see him handing there, and they start to tell this to him, and he looks over and he says, "You tell him he won't, no more than what he does with a football, he doesn't even need to have air in it." So anyway, we always had fun, and I think the kids fed off of it. And you end up learning, from yourself, and from the things in that. 1981, one of the best teams I ever coached, went 9-0, but didn't make the playoffs. Never got a chance to play in the playoffs.
Music going on there?
No, my dad wasn't involved in that. But that was one of the best teams I ever coached. That was when they only took 4 teams into each playoff. Or no, they took 8 teams, but only 2 they had 4 sections and only 2 from a section. There were 4 undefeated teams in our section. So we knew going into that last game that we weren't going to make the playoffs even if we won. Macocata Valley was going to make the 3A playoffs because they were undefeated, whether they won or lost. They were in the 3A playoffs. And I was so afraid of what was going to happen. I always was honest with the kids, and people would say, "Well, you shouldn't tell them." Well, they sense, so, what's up. So I just was honest with them, and one of them asked me, says, "Can we make the playoffs if we win?" And I said, "No." I said, "You got to go out and see if you can just play for your pride now. Play for yourself. That's what you play for anyway. And be the best you can be." And we went out in Macocata Valley. We're out stretching. We're on the field doing our stretching, and their players come out and they run circles around us. And I can remember, and then they went and lined up on the 50-yard line and went down to one knee and just sat there and stared at us. And I had a player by the name of Mike Epker. Mike looks up at me and he says, "Coach, can I wave at him?" And I said, "Sure, Mike." I said, "Go right ahead as long as you don't mind not playing." He said, "You're serious, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." I said, "You ignore him." So Mac Valley was really going to take it to us. And we were ahead 27-0 at the end of the first quarter.
Oh,
And those kids went out and played the best ball of their lives. That group of kids, just out of curiosity of who was on that team, there it is. It was Kevin Wall, Joe Romine, Mark Roseberry, Kevin Townsend, Randy Duro, Andy Seekert, Kevin Haynes, David Hines, Bill Hannon, Dan Klima, Andy Woldridge, Scott Bailey, Kevin Kuderna, Mike Epker, Brad Rhodes, and Alva Barzik. Alva was my favorite. I gotta say, Alva was my favorite. Alva would come to practices and I mean nothing fit. And the helmet, we got him the best fit he could, and I can always remember Mike Epker hit him in practice one night, and Brad Rhodes was Alva's best pal. Brad was this big, Alva was this small, and they made such a pair, you know. And Mike hit Alva, and Alva went flying through the air, and I'd always say, "Hey, come on now, you know, don't tee off on him like that." But it was hard to slow Mike Epker down. Alva popped right up, and I mean, the helmet's turned, he's looking through the air hole. And Brad Rhodes is over there picking him up. "Are you all right, Alva?" And Alva wasn't going to look. And I mean, at first you were scared that he was hurt, and then when you realized he wasn't hurt, you wanted to burst out laughing because it was so funny to look at. But you know, there were things like that would happen in practices and that you look back and you laugh about. But that Maquoketa Valley game was you know, quite the story with that group of kids. 84 was the group that went to the state finals, and we lost in the championship game. And that was a great year. We never expected to have that kind of success that year. Great group of kids. 84 seniors were Alan Sundermeyer, Scott Andrews, Eric Baumgartner, Greg Dufo. Greg Dufo became the next head football coach when I retired the first time. Philip Noblet, Rod Comrie, Jay Kloppenberg, Marty Frankson, Robbie Gray, Jeff Lewis, Joe Ellis, Todd Dempster, Jeff Dufo, Dudley Granger, Pat Lazenby, Sean Wuchter, Bob Heppen, Brad Hanover, Brian Walters, Tim Brizalon, Darrell Bauer. But that's some of the kids that were in that class in that state runner-up group. The next year was the year we won the state championship. We came back and we were ranked the #1 team in the state right from the beginning of the season. And that was the most relaxing year I ever coached. I never had to worry about those kids being ready to play football. They were just always ready. I never had to, they came to practice every night, they practiced hard every night, they concentrated every night. The second team might have been able to go undefeated too. They were that good. Our second team was so good that, well, they were playing over half of every ball game. And they were so good. I always remember the middle of the season, we're playing a team, LeGrand, LDF LeGrand. They came over here, they were our non-district game. Chris Wall and Kenny Jones were my 2 all-state running backs. And they were both all-state running backs as juniors, and this is their senior year. They didn't dress for the game. Kenny Jones had dropped a piece of glass at work and nicked a tendon, so he didn't play. And Chris Wall had a bruise on his knee, so I decided I was going to hold him out. It was a non-conference game. And so I put my 2 backups in there, or Steve Kramer and Mark Wade as the running backs. Well, they were the backups. After the game, the LeGrand coach come over and he says, boy, I was told how good those two running backs, Wall and Jones, were, but boy, they were every bit as good or better than I thought. And I said, I'm sorry, but they're the two sitting there in their leather jackets. They didn't dress tonight. And he went, you got to be kidding. But that was an example of what that group was like. Practice was the toughest part because they were so good, the second string, that I was constantly having to try to pull things back because they were just, there was so much competition. But best story about that group, state championship game, into the third quarter. And right there I'll stop and I'll say, people always ask, what did you think about? Go ahead.
No, I don't want.
Yeah. I always said, what did you think about before the game and the night before and that? One thing kept going through my mind until kickoff. It went through my mind. What am I going to say if we lose again? What am I going to say if we lose again? What would I say to that group of seniors? They were runner-up the year before. If they didn't win it all this year, what was I going to say to them? Kathy kept saying, stop thinking about it. I'd say, I'd like to, but I just can't get it out of my mind. It was such a third quarter, in the third quarter, the score is 14-14. We got the ball on about our own 30-yard line. I walk out to the huddle. They're all standing there. They're smiling at me, and they said, we got it, Coach. I said, am I missing something? I think it's 14-14. And they said, we got it. They said, they are gassed just like we were last year at the end of the third quarter. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, just keep running the power play. Just keep running the power play. And Kenny Jones says, we really can't run it to the right. He says, that kid over there is pretty good. He'll stuff it. Just keep running it to the left. And he says, Chris, if you get tired, I'll switch with you and I'll care. And they would. They just switch backs. So if one got tired, they just switch and run the other back. And that's how unselfish they were. And we ended up scoring 14 more points in the fourth quarter and won 28-14. They were right. And strange things like that happen. But I always remember those kids looking at me and smiling and said, we got him, Coach. And I'm sitting there looking at that scoreboard thinking, God, what am I missing? These kids know something I don't know. Then 2 years later, we were up at Grundy Center. And that was one of the real heartbreakers. Game ended up 0-0. At the end of the game, we had to go into overtime. And we lost the game 7-6. And Grundy Center, and that was at Grundy Center. And Grundy Center went on and won the state championship the next Saturday by 35 points. So I always sat and say that could have been another one, that we were so close, but just couldn't quite there. But like I said, you got to be lucky too. So we had, back in 1992 is when we quit playing in the conference when we went to districts. And that's when football really became hard because we weren't playing Springville and Central City and that. Now we're playing Williamsburg's, Benton Communities, Solon's, Mount Vernon's, and things really became difficult. And the last couple of years have been extremely difficult when we went up north. We were playing Sumner Fredericksburg, and Fredericksburg had been the state champion for 2 years in a row 2 years ago. West Union was one of the state powers. We had about 4 or 5 teams in that league that were continuously good year after year after year, but we had to open up with Williamsburg, who was one of the state 3A powers, big community, one of the state 3A powers, and our schedule really made it difficult. Hopefully next year it'll be a little bit, not quite as bad. We still have Williamsburg and Benton Community, but hopefully that, we're going back south now, so we'll still have tough games in that. 98 was when I came back to coaching, and at that time, if you had ever told me I was going to coach another 10 years when I came back, I never would have thought that in a million years. And of course, I always said probably the worst thing we did was we came back and we went undefeated the first 2 years in a row I came back. And we had that old thing then again where now if we only won 5 games, it was a losing season. And that's sad, that's sad. But I'm gonna miss it. Next year, they're gonna go to a new format, which I don't like, but nobody asked me anyway, so, but they're gonna take the top 4 teams in each district into the playoffs. So they'll go from 16 teams to 32 teams in the playoffs. If they would have had that format, we would have qualified every year I coached here except one. But I don't like it. There were no playoffs when I started coaching, and I still like that the best. The 9th game was over with, you put your pads away and you went on to basketball. And if you had a great year and you won every game, you could pack the pads up and you're undefeated. Now, there's only one way to be undefeated. You gotta be the state champion. And what's the odds of that? And so, but here again, I'm old-fashioned. So I kind of liked it that way. The state playoffs didn't start until the year before I came here in 1972.
So they didn't have state championships back then?
Nope. You played your 8 or 9 game schedule, and that was it. It was over with.
But the playoffs were exciting.
Yeah, they're exciting.
They were
They're exciting.
very exciting.
When you go as many times as we did there in the 80s, where we were going into the semifinals and the championship games and that, the seasons get real long. Real long. And it's real hard. What bothered me was it was real hard on those kids that were 3 and 4 sport players and also in music and in that. I think it was just, I just think it got to be too much.
Longer now, won't it?
Yeah, like,
No, it's not. They're gonna put it, slightly. They're gonna start 3 days earlier is all. I'm not just sure how they're gonna do that, but somehow it works out that they only play one more game is all it plays. And so they just slip in one more game. But I just, playoffs are exciting for the fans, and I can see that. But I guess now that you know my background, you know how I like the kids being able to do all those other activities. And when it's all over with and that, none of it's that important. It's just that the enjoyment that you got out of participating in, and the people that you met. I met a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. You missed that.
Haven't improved her much though, have you?
Well, improved her? No, I'm not going there. I'm not starting there. But
Did she give you a quarter for saying that?
no, she didn't. No, she didn't. I'll get an attaboy. But got a good questions. I'm really going to miss the kids and the coaches, but it was time. It was getting to the point where the energy level to do what I felt like I had to do and put in the hours that I thought I had to put in. It was getting to the point where it was getting a chore. It was getting hard to put all those hours in. I was getting so tired at the end of the season. And she kept saying, it would sure be nice to be able to take a trip somewhere in the fall, be able to do something in the fall. But I wouldn't even go to Iowa games or anything like that on Saturdays because I wouldn't be done. Well, she'd copy all of my films. And Saturday morning started off like this. We had to make 2 exchange tapes, a player's copy, a coach's copy, and then a master copy. So she would make 5 copies of every game tape Saturday morning. Well, that'd take all morning. You'd start about 5, 6 in the morning and you'd get done about noon. And I would start working on statistics at that time, and then I would have to go in and I'd have to send them into all the newspapers. I'd have to send them into the state, then I'd have to send them into our district, thing and that. And we got it so that if we started about 5 in the morning, we could be done by noon on Saturdays.
That wasn't with the computer either, probably, right?
No,
No.
no. Computer really didn't help in that. You still had to enter it into the computer, so, and they had sheets for you to put it on anyway, so. And then Saturday mornings, I'd be up at Sunday mornings, I'd be up at the school at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we'd start breaking down the opponent's tapes, and we'd try to get done by noon. Then I would come home, the other coaches were free, then I'd chart all those plays on cards to show the kids on Monday, and that'd take 2 or 3 hours to do that. And then start off with practices again on Monday. And that got to be where it wasn't as fun as it used to be.
So you had a scout that went and did the opponent.
No, we got tapes from the other team.
Tape has changed.
Yeah. And back in those days, when we didn't get tapes from the other teams, that's another thing people couldn't understand is I never sent a scout out. And they said, well, how do you know what they're going to do? And I said, I'm not worried about what they're going to do. I'm worried about what we're going to do. And I never sent scouts out. I broke all the rules. And my mom and dad say, yes, you did. I always like to tell a story about my dad. And I have the article. I don't have it here, but it was written by Carl Hogendorf, the newspaper man of North English. And he said he was writing about a man that he probably respected more than any other man. He said he was the track coach at North English. That was my dad. And he said his son was one of the best long jumpers in the state of Iowa. And they were in the finals of the state long jump. And Dwayne Petz from Williamsburg, and that would be like from being over to Alburnett, because North English and Williamsburg were such rivals. Dwayne Petz was a tremendous athlete too, but he didn't have anybody to work with him. So he'd scratched on his first 3 jumps and went over the board. My dad went and helped him straighten out his steps. On his last jump, he beat Lonnie for the state championship. And then Lonnie was a sophomore. Lonnie ended up winning it the next 2 years as a junior and senior. But my dad helped the opponent from the rival school win the state championship over his own son. But, helping another kid. And so I had a wonderful mother and father that did.
And that's how you earned the respect that you did.
Well, I hope so. I sure respected the kids I had.
You won Don and Robin's respect.
Yeah, thank you. That's
Oh, we were lucky.
that's worth more pay than you could get in a man years.
Send
You
it
know,
where it
the
was
money
like.
Kathy would have spent, at least
Yeah.
I had.
When I would be different places and people would say, where are you from? I'd say San Fran. Oh, Ken Rogers is your football coach, isn't he?
Yeah.
You're
You're lucky, you got
you're a
that
famous man, Mr. Rogers.
And I was the failure in the family. That's a story. We were sitting at Christmas. This was after I won the state championship, and I was named the Iowa High School Coach of the Year. My dad and my brother and I were sitting in the living room at their house up in Delhi. And I always felt like the failure of the family because my dad was Mr. Everything to everybody. My brother, when I was in high school, was an All-American running back at the University of Iowa. He was the hero of North English. And then there was me. And I was just me. Teddy. And there was Teddy. And I didn't get to play football for 2 years because I had bone disease and couldn't play any athletics in my early years. So here I was, couldn't play any athletics or anything, and my brother's the star and the hero, and my dad and mom, and that's so. I always felt that way, but we were all very, very close. I mean, I never resented my brother or was jealous of my brother, but I just felt like I could not hold up. And we were sitting there at that time, and I said, I always was jealous of, you two. And they looked at me and said, what? You have accomplished everything that we couldn't as coaches. And I had never realized that. I'd never thought of it.
Kind of like Mr. Holland's opus.
Yeah.
You strive, and then finally
Yeah.
when you're
You're so
done.
busy doing the job that you don't think about it. And I always remember that. Dad and Lonnie looking at me and saying, what?
Yeah. I remember my son Aaron coming home after that last get-together, at the end of the senior year, and just talking on and on about what Mr. Rogers said, and he just like, wow. It was like, you were his hero, and you would be forever in his life, and like, if he was down and out, come to Mr. Rogers, and he'd save you, that kind of thing. You just...
Well, I always told them that the last practice, I'd always take the seniors at the end of the football field. And I'd have them have their backs to the rest of the team. The rest of the team would get in 2 single file lines. And then I would talk to the seniors, and basically what I told them was is that I'd be their friend for life. And that, you know, whenever times were tough, I didn't have all the answers, but maybe I could recommend someone that did. And I was never more than a collect phone call away, and that I would always receive take the phones, and never hesitate to call me. And I have had to collect phone calls over the years. And so, of course, obviously I would never tell who they were, but they have come. And that came from my heart. And I meant it, because look what those kids gave me. They gave me everything. What can I do for them now except to be their friend? And hey, like I told them, I said, I don't care what kind of trouble you're in. I'm still your friend. And I said, everybody makes bad decisions. They said, if you've made some bad decisions and got in trouble in that, I'm still here, I'm still your friend, and I'll help you try to start making some better decisions. I'll find someone that will help me. But,
You couldn't have said anything better.
no.
Think of that life lesson, you know.
Mhm.
that you-
Yeah.
And I think on and off the field, you know, you had to have some trying situations with
Oh,
some of the kids. And,
Well, it's
yeah.
no different. They're just your sons out there.
Yeah.
And you have your trying situations with them, and yeah, but, you know, it's just like being a dad.
But you never let your guard down. You still kept that respect.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Are you sure you don't wanna keep on coaching?
No.
No.
There's that part of me that will always want to coach,
Yeah,
but I just, I'm really gonna miss the coaches. I'm really gonna miss the players, but, you know, you gotta know when it's time to go. It's time to go.
But the people that you know still live here.
Two girls.
I know. Yeah.
I tell him there's a brotherhood that you have in coaching, that you never have that in a business world.
No.
It's not the same.
And it's not the same in any other sport. For some reason, football coaches have a tighter bond than all the coaches in the other sports. I don't understand that. And of course, I've coached all the sports over the years. I coached girls basketball. I coached, you know, baseball. I've coached boys and girls basketball, and didn't coach